In the world of heavy-duty trucks, there's a few names that you're probably familiar with hearing, and one of those is Super Duty, which is Ford's heavy-duty line of trucks. But it wasn't always known as Super Duty, and it's changed quite a lot over the last 2 decades that it's been around. So I think we should take a deep dive and look at the entire history of the Super Duty and what came before it. So sit back, get comfy, get your popcorn, and let's get into it. In order to fully understand the Super Duty line of trucks, we need to rewind the clock to 1998, which is when Ford ditched their old F-Series heavy-duty trucks that they had used for many years prior to that, adopted a whole new body and a whole new way of doing everything, and named it the Super Duty. Really, Ford's heavy-duty truck line had changed very little since 1980, and it deserved a makeover. Part of the problem with the old heavy-duty Ford trucks is that they shared the same body and interior as the standard F-150. While that's not a bad strategy for maximizing profits and minimizing costs, it's ultimately something that they didn't want to do, as it blurred the lines between a regular truck and a heavy-duty truck. But don't just take my word for it. In their own words, the two-platform strategy was developed to recognize the significant differences between commercial and personal use markets while meeting the needs of both. So, with the release of the all-new body style and the new Super Duty name attached to their heavy-duty trucks, they also separated the assembly lines. By giving their new Super Duty truck a new body that wasn't shared with the standard trucks, they were also able to massively increase interior space. Along with that, a heavy-duty frame, axles, and suspension made the new Super Duty truck a more consumer-friendly truck as compared to the old heavy-duty Ford trucks. And when I say that the new Super Duty truck is bigger than the outgoing truck, I really mean it. As compared to the previous heavy-duty trucks, Ford lengthened the chassis 4 inches for the regular cab and crew cab models and 3 inches for the super cab models. They also used wider doors, larger seats, and more. Hell, even something as simple as the buttons and the glove box were made larger on the Super Duty. One of the big innovations that they brought to the Super Duty was the new combination of 4-wheel drive and a dual rear wheel axle. For the years prior, those two options couldn't be had together unless you modified your truck after purchase. It's a weird thing for Ford to have omitted these two options together previously, but nonetheless, it was a pretty big feature for the new Super Duty. Underneath the truck, Ford made some pretty solid changes to the axles. More specifically, the Dana 50 twin traction beam front suspension was finally retired in favor of a Dana 50 solid axle or a Dana 60 mono beam, depending how your truck was configured. In the rear, Ford debuted the new Super Duty with the Sterling 10.5 rear axle, which was slightly larger than the Sterling 10.25 that they had previously used. The new axles helped to increase the gross axle weight rating by quite a bit, and ultimately helped make the Super Duty a much better truck than the trucks before it. Under the hood, Ford gave you 3 options for the Super Duty. A 5.4-liter Triton V8, which was the base engine, and frankly isn't really anything special. But for people who wanted to continue using a gas motor, the new 6.8-liter V10 was something that Ford had never offered before in their trucks. And the V10 output an impressive 275 horsepower and 410 pound-feet of torque. The last engine option was the 7.3 Powerstroke, used in the previous heavy-duty trucks. But with the launch of the Super Duty, the Navistar-built Powerstroke was given a few important upgrades, all of which led up to it outputting 235 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque, making it the most powerful diesel engine on the truck market in 1999. That takes us up to 2003, where we saw the first major changes to the Super Duty since its launch. The biggest change Ford made midway through the 2003 year was the introduction of the 6-liter Powerstroke. Now, we've already made plenty of videos on that engine, so we won't go into detail here, but simply put, they introduced it as a solution to the EPA regulations regarding emissions output that the 7.3 Powerstroke was simply not going to pass. While the 6-liter promised to be a great replacement for the 7.3 Powerstroke, in the long run, the world found out that it was frankly a poorly designed engine with a lot of little failing points as well as a few major failing points. But enough on that. Along with the new Powerstroke engine, Ford also introduced a new 5R110W transmission, which was vastly different than the 5R100 that came before it. If we fast forward a year and a half to 2005, there were even more big changes. On the gas side of things, Ford introduced 3-valve heads to both the 5.4 and the 6.8 engine, bumping power to 300 horsepower and 365 pound-feet, and 355 horsepower and 455 pound-feet respectively. Arguably the biggest change that came with the 2005 update was the front suspension for 4-wheel drive models switching from leaf spring to coil spring, which helped to reduce the unsprung weight and ultimately helped the truck handle better and ride quite a bit better. To match the improved front ride quality, the rear springs also saw a change to their spring rate as well as a staggered rear shock setup for improved ride quality. All of these changes led to class-leading tow ratings, most of which were made possible by frame reinforcements, the changes to the front suspension, and more powerful engine options. But Ford didn't stop there, because just 2 years later, in 2007, they once again gave the Super Duty a pretty major update. Arguably, the biggest change came in the form of the 6.4-liter Powerstroke, which was essentially an upgraded version of the 6-liter Powerstroke, which had become very problematic for Ford's truck customers. The 6.4 was supposed to fix all the issues of the 6-liter, but in the long run, we now know it was even worse. But at the time that it came out, it promised to fix all the issues and crank up the power significantly to 350 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. With the new motor also came some new emission systems, namely the new diesel particulate filter and twin EGR cooler system. On paper, the 6.4 Powerstroke was the cleanest diesel that Navistar had ever built for Ford, but it's not like Ford customers really cared all that much about the emissions output. The 5R110W transmission also received some upgrades, as well as fine-tuning of the tow command system, which worked with the factory electronic trailer controller and the truck's ABS system to ensure safe trailer braking in low traction situations. With Ford wanting to continue increasing their tow ratings for the Super Duty, they revised the frame and the suspension, most notably changing the rear suspension with a much longer leaf spring, which was designed to decrease axle wrap and give the truck a higher capacity without negatively impacting ride quality. On the outside of the truck, the cab, fenders, tailgate, grille, and headlights were all changed quite a bit to give the truck a fresh new look. In my opinion, this version of the Super Duty is definitely the most commercial looking truck and arguably the worst. All of this leads to record-setting ratings, specifically for the F450, which offered the best fifth wheel towing capacity at 24,500 pounds. For reference, the F250 was only rated at 16,400 pounds for its fifth wheel tow rating. Ultimately though, the 6.4 Powerstroke was not a good engine. It was problematic, and although it made a lot of power, it gave Ford a lot of problems. And that ultimately prompted another refresh of the Super Duty shortly after in 2011, which is officially known as the third generation of the Super Duty. With the new revamped Super Duty, Ford changed the front face, upgraded the interior, added a stronger rear axle option, but most notably changed the diesel engine option once again. This time around, they had enough with Navistar International and developed their own engine for the Super Duty, which was the 6.7-liter Powerstroke. The new engine was backed by a new 6-speed automatic transmission known as the 6R140. We've gone over the 6.7 Powerstroke in detail in other videos, so we really won't get into it here. But simply put, the 6.7 Powerstroke was significantly better than the 6.4, so much so that Ford is still using the 6.7 over a decade later, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. The unfortunate downside with the 6.7 Powerstroke is that it introduced selective catalytic reduction, also known as SCR, which is a system that uses diesel exhaust fluid to reduce NOx emission output even further than what the EGR system does. While it's another annoying thing that you have to maintain, the addition of SCR significantly improved fuel mileage as compared to the 6.4 Powerstroke. In terms of the metal on the truck, the cab was left the same, but Ford added a new grille and taller headlights, as well as reshaped fenders, which looked much more modern and gave the Super Duty a much needed modern look, although the overall shape was still the same. Ford kept the same axles under the truck, but they dropped the Dana S110 that was being used in the F450 for the Dana 80 in the dually F350 and F450. The Sterling 10.5 was kept around for the F250 and the single rear wheel F350, but now it was slightly upgraded with larger bearings and an electronic locking differential depending how your truck was spec'd out. On the gas motors, Ford ditched the two options that they were previously offering, which were the 5.4 V8 and the 6.8 V10 Triton motors, in favor of the new 6.2 two-valve V8 engine, which output 285 horsepower and 405 pound-feet of torque in the Super Duty, although this engine output even more horsepower in the F-150 at 411 horsepower and 434 pound-feet of torque. Regardless though, the new gas motor certainly wasn't bad in terms of power output, but it was a downgrade compared to the V10, although it was an upgrade compared to the outgoing V8. And once again, this led to some very impressive towing and hauling capabilities, with the F450 yet again offering class-leading fifth wheel towing, which was far ahead of what GM and Ram were offering at that time. That takes us up to 2017, where the Super Duty went under its first ever complete redesign since its launch in 1999. This redesign was part of a back and forth fight with Ram, who actually managed to beat out the F450 in terms of gross combined weight rating, which then prompted the more powerful second generation of the 6.7 Powerstroke in 2015, so that Ford could take back the crown with the F450. Interestingly enough, this full makeover of the Super Duty is actually when Ford went back to their old ways and used the same cab for both the F-150 and the F-250. As I mentioned at the start of the video, Ford used a different cab and assembly line for their normal F-150 and then the Super Duty trucks. But the redesign changed that, and financially it makes sense. The more parts you can share between trucks, the more money you can save, and the more profits you can generate. The new body was also massively different in the fact that it was now an aluminum body to save weight. With all the saved weight from the body, Ford was able to add weight to the frame with a lot more reinforcement. Along with that, the makeover included a new front end design, a new rear end design, new rear axle options, and even more power, to the tune of 440 horsepower and 860 pound-feet of torque. With the outside makeover drastically changing the Super Duty, Ford also massively changed the interior in 2017 and made it much better. Again, this was easier for them to do because the cab had the same dimensions as the F-150 cab, because it is an F-150 cab. In the rear, Ford kept the same Sterling 10.5 rear axle for the standard F-250 trucks, but introduced a new Dana M275 for the single rear wheel F-350 trucks and the Dana M300 for the dually F-350 and F-450 trucks. With more power, a much better boxed frame, and better axles, the towing and payload numbers yet again jumped up quite a bit. This time around, the F-450 gross combined vehicle rating was increased to 41,800 pounds, with a class-leading 32,500 pound gooseneck rating, 27,500 pound fifth wheel rating, and 21,000 pound conventional rating. That takes us up to 2020, where Ford yet again improved the Super Duty, this time massively increasing the power output to 475 horsepower and 1,050 pound-feet of torque. On top of that, Ford brought a new, bigger and better gas motor to the Super Duty for those customers who didn't want to go with the diesel. This new gas motor is the 7.3 liter V8 that outputs 430 horsepower and 475 pound-feet of torque. Both the upgraded 6.7 Powerstroke and 7.3 gas motor are paired with a new 10-speed transmission to replace the outdated 6R 140 transmission, except for the F-250 models with the 6.2 liter gas motor. I won't get into too many details on the 10-speed transmission, but simply put, it's been happily adopted and most people absolutely love it as compared to the old 6-speed or really any other automatic transmission for that matter. Along with the improved Powerstroke, the new gas motor, and a new transmission, Ford also gave the Super Duty a fresh new front end with improved airflow to help keep everything cool. They again upped the quality of the interior and introduced some cool new features. As you'd expect, with more power and a better transmission, the towing and hauling ratings were once again increased quite a bit. Maximum gooseneck towing capacity for the F-450 increased to 37,000 pounds, while the dually F-350 is at 35,750 pounds and the F-250 at 22,800 pounds. So that's pretty much that. Since 2020, the power output on the 6.7 Powerstroke has not changed, neither has really any of the tow ratings. It's pretty much remained all the same since 2020, and that kind of makes sense. You know, Ford has a typical 2, 3, or 4 year life cycle, so you'd expect an upgrade to the Super Duty truck either later this year in 2022 or next year in 2023. We'll probably see a little bit more power and maybe a slightly refreshed front end. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to smash the thumbs up button because it really helps me out. Get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos. A lot of you watching this are not subscribed, only like 5% of you are subscribed, so if you could do that, it would massively help me out, and I'll see you guys in the next one.